The August sun hung like a molten coin in the Texas sky, merciless and unforgiving as it beat down on the dusty ranch road where Grace Mitchell stood frozen, her wedding dress billowing around her ankles. The delicate lace veil that should have been draped over her face was clutched in one trembling hand, while the other held tight to a small leather suitcase containing everything she owned in this world. 23 years old, and for the first time in her life she had defied her father, the most respected preacher in 3 counties. She had left a man at the altar, a man handpicked by her father, a man who had promised her security but whose eyes had promised something else entirely. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The sound of approaching hoofbeats broke the silence. Grace turned, heart hammering against her ribs, half expecting to see her father's men come to drag her back to the church. Instead, a lone rider appeared on the horizon, silhouetted against the setting sun. A stranger, thank the Lord. She stepped back into the shadows of a gnarled oak tree, her white dress a betrayal in the fading light. Ethan Cole had been riding fence lines since dawn, his broad shoulders aching from the day's labor. At 32, he'd carved out a modest existence on land that most had declared worthless. 7 years of backbreaking work had transformed Redemption Ranch into something resembling prosperity. Though the loneliness of the endeavor had left its mark, his wife Eleanor had lasted just 2 seasons before declaring ranch life a sentence worse than death. The divorce papers had come a year later, the ink barely dry before she'd remarried a banker from Austin. He spotted the flash of white from half a mile away, an anomaly against the dusty landscape. His stallion, Maverick, snorted in warning as they approached. Ethan's hand instinctively moved to the rifle secured to his saddle. Rustlers had been active in the area, and a man couldn't be too careful. "Hello?" he called, keeping a careful distance. "Someone there?" Grace stepped forward, resignation washing over her. Running had been foolish. Where could she possibly go in a wedding dress with night falling and not a soul to help her? "Just me," she answered, lifting her chin despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "I'm not looking for trouble. Just passing through." Ethan stared, momentarily stunned by the sight before him. A bride, miles from anywhere, standing alone on a road that led to nothing but his ranch, and then miles of empty wilderness beyond. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins, tumbling in waves around a face that carried both defiance and terror in equal measure. "Passing through to where exactly?" Ethan asked, swinging down from his saddle. "Nearest town's 20 miles back, the way you came, and there's nothing ahead but my ranch and then desert for another 40 miles. Grace bit her lower lip, the reality of her situation settling like a stone in her stomach. "I haven't exactly figured that part out yet," she admitted. "You running from something or someone?" Ethan's eyes narrowed, taking in the dirt that stained the hem of her dress, the small suitcase clutched in her hand. "My wedding," she said simply. A rumble of thunder interrupted them, rolling across the plains like a warning. Ethan glanced at the darkening sky, the clouds building on the western horizon. "Storm's coming," he said, gesturing toward the ominous bank of clouds. "Bad one by the looks of it. Flash floods in these parts can sweep away a full-grown man, let alone." His eyes traveled over her slight frame. "I'll be fine," Grace insisted, though the distant lightning made her flinch. Ethan sighed, rubbing a hand across his stubbled jaw. This wasn't his problem. He had livestock to secure before the storm hit, a leaking barn roof to worry about, 100 other concerns more pressing than a runaway bride with more courage than sense. "My ranch is about 3 miles from here," he said finally. "You can wait out the storm there, then figure out your next move when it passes." Grace hesitated, her father's warnings about strange men echoing in her mind. But the sky was darkening rapidly, and the first fat raindrops had begun to fall, leaving dark splotches on her white dress. "I don't want to impose," she said. Ethan almost laughed. "Miss, no offense, but you're standing in the middle of nowhere in a wedding dress with a storm about to break. I'd say imposing is the least of your worries right now." Another flash of lightning, closer this time, followed almost immediately by a crack of thunder that made Maverick stomp nervously. "Decision time!" Ethan said, extending a hand toward her. "Storm won't wait on propriety." Grace took a deep breath and placed her hand in his, allowing him to help her onto the horse behind him. Her dress bunched awkwardly, forcing her to sit sideways, one arm tentatively circling his waist. "Hold tight," he instructed, nudging Maverick into a gallop just as the sky opened up. They rode in silence, the rain quickly soaking through Grace's dress, plastering it to her skin. She shivered against Ethan's back, trying to maintain some distance, while also seeking warmth. Redemption Ranch appeared through the curtain of rain, a modest two-story house with a wide porch, a large barn, and several outbuildings scattered across the property. Not as grand as her father's estate, but solid and well-kept. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Ethan led her to the porch, then disappeared to stable Maverick. Grace stood dripping on the worn wooden boards, uncertainty keeping her rooted to the spot. The door was unlocked, but she couldn't bring herself to enter uninvited. When Ethan returned, he found her still standing there, soaked to the skin and shivering. "For heaven's sake," he muttered, ushering her inside, "you'll catch your death." The interior was surprisingly welcoming, clean and orderly with simple, sturdy furniture. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, unlit but with wood stacked neatly beside it. "Wait here," Ethan said, disappearing up a narrow staircase. He returned moments later with a bundle of clothing and a towel. "Bathrooms down the hall. These might swim on you, but they're dry." Grace accepted the offering with murmured thanks, grateful for the chance to escape his scrutiny. In the small bathroom, she peeled off her sodden wedding dress. The weight of it, a physical manifestation of the future she'd just rejected. The clothes he'd provided, a flannel shirt and denim pants held up with a length of rope, swallowed her whole, but the relief of dry fabric against her skin outweighed any concern for appearance. When she emerged, Ethan had lit the fire and was setting a kettle on the stove in the adjoining kitchen. "Coffee?" he offered, his back to her. "Please." An awkward silence settled between them, broken only by the howling wind and the rhythmic tapping of rain against the windows. "So," Ethan said finally, placing a steaming mug before her, "you want to tell me why you're running from your own wedding? Or is that none of my business?" Grace wrapped her hands around the warm mug, drawing comfort from its heat. "My father arranged it," she said simply. "I was supposed to marry Reverend Samuel Porter today. A union blessed by God, according to my father." "And you disagreed with the Almighty's matchmaking skills?" There was a hint of amusement in Ethan's voice. "I disagreed with my father using God as an excuse to marry me off to a man 30 years my senior who's buried 2 wives already," Grace replied, more bitterness in her tone than she'd intended. Ethan's expression sobered. "I see. My father is Preacher Mitchell," she continued, watching for the recognition that would inevitably cross his face. It came immediately. Jeremiah Mitchell's fire and brimstone sermons were legendary throughout the region. His revival meetings drew crowds from hundreds of miles around, his prophecies of damnation and salvation keeping sinners awake at night and filling the collection plates on Sunday mornings. "That explains a few things," Ethan murmured. "He'll be looking for me," Grace said quietly. "When I didn't say my vows, when I ran." She shuddered, remembering the fury in her father's eyes. "He won't let this humiliation stand." "Why'd you run?" Ethan asked, curiosity evident in his voice. "Most would have just gone through with it, especially with a father like yours." Grace stared into her coffee, the question stirring memories she'd rather forget. "Reverend Porter visited our home often these past few months. My father would leave us alone to become acquainted. The things he said when no one was listening, the way he looked at me." She closed her eyes briefly. "I knew what kind of marriage it would be." Ethan's jaw tightened. "So you ran." "So I ran," she echoed. "Though I didn't plan very well, as you can see." A particularly violent gust of wind rattled the windows, making them both glance toward the worsening storm. Where will you go? Ethan asked. Once the storm passes? Grace laughed, a hollow sound devoid of humor. I have a cousin in San Antonio. She married against my father's wishes 5 years ago. He forbade us from speaking to her, called her dead to the family. But she might take me in if I can reach her. San Antonio's a long way on foot, Ethan observed. I'll find a way, Grace said with more confidence than she felt. The small amount of money sewn into the hem of her wedding dress wouldn't get her far, but she'd rather die than return to her father's house and the fate that awaited her there. Lightning struck nearby, illuminating the room in a harsh white flash, followed immediately by a thunderclap that shook the house to its foundations. Grace flinched involuntarily. Storm's getting worse, Ethan said unnecessarily. You'll have to stay the night. We can figure out the rest tomorrow. Grace's eyes widened. I couldn't possibly. You can and you will, Ethan interrupted firmly. I'm not sending anyone out in this weather, let alone someone with nowhere to go. There's a spare room upstairs. No one's used it in years, but it's clean enough. Before she could protest further, a frantic scratching at the back door drew Ethan's attention. He crossed to open it, and a bedraggled border collie rushed in, shaking water everywhere. Scout! Ethan scolded, though there was affection in his voice. You're late for dinner, and you're making a mess. The dog ignored him, instead padding directly to Grace, curious brown eyes studying her with intelligence that seemed almost human. After a moment's consideration, Scout placed a wet paw on her knee, head tilted in greeting. Well, I'll be, Ethan said, surprise evident in his tone. Scout doesn't take to strangers as a rule. Seems you've made a friend. Grace hesitantly stroked the dog's damp fur. I've always loved dogs. My father wouldn't allow pets. Said animals belong in barns, not homes. Scout's more than a pet, Ethan replied, reaching for a towel to dry the dog. Best cattle dog in the county and smarter than most people I know. She has opinions about folks, and I've learned to trust her judgment. Scout settled at Grace's feet, apparently having decided her place for the evening. Looks like you've been vouched for, Ethan said with a small smile. High praise coming from her. The domesticity of the moment struck Grace suddenly, the warm kitchen, the crackling fire, the dog at her feet, the storm raging outside while she sat safe within these walls. It was a glimpse of a life she'd never dared imagine for herself, one free from her father's rigid control and punishing faith. Thank you, she said softly, for taking me in. Not everyone would have. Ethan shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude. Just doing what anyone would. No, Grace said with certainty. Not anyone. Not everyone is kind. Something in her tone made him look at her more closely, noticing for the first time the faint scar near her temple, usually hidden by her hair. His expression darkened, but he asked no questions. You should eat something, he said instead, moving to the stove. I'm no chef, but I can manage beans and cornbread without burning down the house. Usually. Grace smiled, her first genuine smile since he'd found her. I can cook, she offered, if you'll let me. It's the least I can do. Ethan hesitated, then gestured toward the kitchen. Have at it. Supplies are limited, but you're welcome to whatever you can find. Cooking had always been Grace's refuge, one of the few activities her father had encouraged as appropriately feminine. In Ethan's kitchen, she found simple ingredients: flour, lard, beans, a few vegetables from his garden, dried herbs hanging from the ceiling beams. Within an hour, the house was filled with the aroma of fresh biscuits and hearty stew. They ate in companionable silence, the storm providing background music to their meal. Scout remained vigilant at Grace's feet, occasionally accepting offered morsels with gentle manners. That was the best meal I've had in this house, Ethan said when his bowl was empty. Maybe the best meal I've had since my mother was alive. Grace flushed with pleasure at the compliment. Cooking calms me, always has. What else do you like to do? Ethan asked, genuinely curious. When you're not running from weddings or feeding strangers, I mean. The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked about her interests before. Her father had dictated her activities: church work, Bible study, domestic skills suitable for a future minister's wife. Pleasure for its own sake was considered self-indulgent, even sinful. "I like to read," she admitted, "and sing, though only when I'm alone. And I've always wanted to learn to ride, but my father said it wasn't ladylike." "Not ladylike?" Ethan looked genuinely perplexed. "Half the best riders I know are women. My sister could outride any man in the county before she married and moved east." The conversation flowed more easily after that, with Ethan telling stories of ranch life while Grace shared cautious glimpses of her sheltered existence. As the evening wore on, her posture relaxed, her laughs came more freely, and the shadow of fear in her eyes receded somewhat. When she finally yawned, unable to hide her exhaustion any longer, Ethan showed her to the spare room upstairs. It was simply furnished, but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a patchwork quilt. "It was my sister's room," he explained, "before she married." "It's perfect," Grace assured him. "Thank you again for everything." Ethan nodded awkwardly. "Well, good night then. Scout and I rise early, but sleep as long as you need." Left alone, Grace sank onto the bed, the events of the day crashing over her like waves. She had done it, defied her father, rejected the marriage he'd arranged, fled the only life she'd ever known. Freedom tasted strange on her tongue, sweet but terrifying. She knelt beside the bed, hands clasped in prayer as she'd done every night of her life. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself asking questions she'd never dared voice before. Was God truly as vengeful as her father claimed? Did he really demand blind obedience to earthly authority, even when that authority caused harm? For the first time, Grace allowed herself to wonder if the God she'd been taught to fear might instead be the source of the courage that had carried her this far. The storm eventually gentled into a steady rain, lulling her toward sleep. Just as she was drifting off, a soft scratching at the door roused her. She opened it to find Scout sitting patiently in the hallway. "Hello there," Grace whispered. Scout padded into the room and jumped lightly onto the foot of the bed, circling 3 times before settling down with a contented sigh. Grace smiled in the darkness. "Keeping watch, are you?" The dog's tail thumped once against the quilt in confirmation. With Scout's reassuring presence, Grace finally surrendered to exhaustion, sleeping deeply for the first time in months. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through uncurtained windows. For a moment, Grace was disoriented. The unfamiliar room and the absence of her father's household routines momentarily confusing. Then memory returned, along with a surge of both terror and exhilaration. She had done it. She had escaped. But to what future? The smell of coffee drifted up the stairs, along with the sound of boots on wooden floors. Scout was gone, presumably having left to join her master when he woke. Grace dressed quickly in her borrowed clothes, attempting to tame her hair with her fingers before giving up and braiding it loosely. The elegant bride of yesterday was gone, replaced by a young woman in oversized men's clothing with dirt still under her fingernails. She found Ethan in the kitchen, frying eggs and bacon. Scout lay nearby, head on paws but eyes alert, tracking Grace's entrance with interest. "Morning," Ethan greeted her. "Thought you might sleep longer after yesterday's excitement." "I've never slept past sunrise in my life," Grace admitted. "My father believes idle hands are the devil's workshop." "Well, there's nothing idle about ranch work," Ethan replied, sliding a plate in front of her. "Eat up. We've got a busy day ahead." "We?" Grace questioned, suddenly anxious. "I should be moving on. I've imposed enough already." Ethan studied her over the rim of his coffee cup. "And where exactly are you planning to go, wearing my clothes and carrying nothing but a wedding dress in that suitcase of yours?" Put that way, her situation sounded even more desperate than it felt. "The stage to San Antonio doesn't come through for another 3 days," Ethan continued. "And even if it did, you'd need money for the fare." He hesitated, then added, "I could use some help around here. Temporary, of course. Room and board, plus wages you could put toward your ticket." Hope and suspicion warred within Grace. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." Ethan shrugged, his expression unreadable. "Let's just say I understand something about wanting to escape. "My father will be looking for me," she warned again. "If he finds me here, he'll make trouble for you." "I've handled trouble before," Ethan said simply. "Besides, no one comes out this way much. Too remote for social calls." Grace considered his offer, weighing her limited options. 3 days of work would give her time to plan her next move, and the thought of a stagecoach fare was more security than she'd had yesterday. "What kind of help do you need?" she asked cautiously. "The usual ranch work, cooking, mending, helping with the garden. The housekeeper from town only comes once a month, and as you can probably tell, I'm not much for domestic details." Grace settled into life at Redemption Ranch with surprising ease. The rhythm of ranch work suited her. Up with the sun, hard physical labor that left her pleasantly exhausted, and simple meals shared in companionable silence. Ethan proved to be a patient teacher, explaining the workings of the ranch without condescension, respecting her quick mind and willingness to learn. "You're a natural," he observed on her 3rd day, watching as she expertly gathered eggs from the henhouse without disturbing the temperamental laying hens. "Most city folks are afraid of the chickens." "I'm hardly city folk," Grace replied, carefully placing the last egg in her basket. "We kept chickens at home too, though my father would never have approved of me wearing pants to tend them." A smile tugged at the corner of Ethan's mouth. "Those pants were my sister's. Found them in a trunk in the attic. Figured they'd fit better than mine." Grace glanced down at the serviceable denim that had replaced her borrowed rope-belted trousers. "Thank you. It's much easier to work in these." The days blended together, each one strengthening Grace's confidence in her decision to flee. Here, miles from her father's influence, she discovered simple joys. Watching a sunrise without being reminded of God's judgment, laughing freely without being scolded for immodesty, expressing opinions without fear of correction. Scout became her constant companion, the border collie trailing her through daily chores with unwavering devotion. Ethan joked that he'd been replaced in his own dog's affections, but there was no resentment in his tone. "She's choosing you," he said one evening as they sat on the porch after dinner, Scout's head resting on Grace's lap. "Dogs know things about people that we can't see." Grace stroked the dog's silky ears. "What does she know about me?" Ethan considered this, his gaze thoughtful in the fading light. "That you're trustworthy. Brave," he paused. "That you've been hurt, but you're not broken by it." The words hung between them, a truth neither had fully acknowledged until that moment. Grace had shared little about her life before arriving at Redemption Ranch, and Ethan hadn't pressed. But Scout's steady presence had somehow bridged what words could not. "My father believes discipline is love," Grace said quietly, her fingers still moving through Scout's fur. "The Bible says, 'Spare the rod, spoil the child.' He never spared it." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, giving her space to continue or stop as she chose. "I tried so hard to be what he wanted," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "The perfect daughter, the obedient servant, the living example of his teachings. But it was never enough. There was always some failure, some sin that required correction." "That's not love," Ethan said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "That's control." Grace looked up, meeting his gaze. "I know that now, but for 23 years I believed him when he said it was for my own good, that he was saving my soul through his discipline." "And Reverend Porter? Was he cut from the same cloth?" A shudder passed through Grace. "Worse, in some ways. My father at least believed in his righteousness. Samuel Porter knew exactly what he was, and he hid it behind scripture and a clerical collar." She fell silent, memories threatening to overwhelm her. Ethan seemed to sense her distress, shifting the conversation to lighter ground. "Tomorrow I thought I might teach you to ride," he offered. "If you're still interested." Grace's face brightened immediately. "Truly? You'd trust me with one of your horses?" "Cinnamon's as gentle as they come," Ethan assured her. "Perfect for beginners. And you've proven yourself capable with everything else around here." The prospect of fulfilling a lifelong dream pushed back the shadows of her past. I'd like that very much. The following morning dawned clear and cool, perfect for her first riding lesson. Ethan led her to the corral where a chestnut mare waited, already saddled and calm. "This is Cinnamon," he introduced, stroking the horse's velvety nose. "She was my sister's before she moved east. Hasn't had a regular rider since." Grace approached slowly, hand extended, as Ethan had taught her. Cinnamon sniffed her fingers, then nudged her palm gently, seeking treats. "She likes you," Ethan observed. "That's half the battle right there." With patient instruction he helped Grace mount, adjusting stirrups and teaching her how to hold the reins properly. Her first few steps on horseback were tentative, but Cinnamon responded beautifully to the slightest pressure, seeming to understand her rider's inexperience. "You're a natural," Ethan called, as she completed her first circle of the corral without assistance. Born to ride. Grace couldn't contain her joy, a laugh bubbling up from deep within her. "It's wonderful, like flying but better." By the end of the lesson, she was trotting confidently, her initial fear replaced by exhilaration. When she finally dismounted, her legs wobbled from the unfamiliar exercise, but her face glowed with accomplishment. "Thank you," she said breathlessly. "I've never felt anything like that before." Ethan's smile reached his eyes, crinkling the corners in a way that transformed his usually serious face. "Tomorrow we'll try riding outside the corral, if you're game." "I can't wait," Grace replied, already looking forward to their next lesson. That evening, as they sat at the kitchen table playing checkers, a comfortable routine they'd established, Ethan cleared his throat awkwardly. "Stage comes through town day after tomorrow," he reminded her. "If you're still planning to leave." Grace's hand hesitated over a checker piece, the reminder of her tenuous situation jarring after days of relative security. "Yes, I suppose it does." "Or," Ethan said carefully, his eyes fixed on the board, "you could stay on a bit longer. Ranch needs a lot of work before winter sets in. Could use the help." Hope flickered in Grace's chest, quickly tempered by caution. "My father won't stop looking for me." "Been thinking about that," Ethan replied. "Town's 20 miles away. Few folks out this direction, and those that are mind their own business. You'd be safe here, at least until you figure out something more permanent." Grace studied him, trying to discern his motivations. "Why would you take that risk for a stranger?" Ethan met her gaze directly. "You're not exactly a stranger anymore, Grace." The simple truth of his statement hung between them. In just a few days, they'd established a rhythm, a partnership of sorts. Grace cooking meals that brought actual flavor back to Ethan's table, Ethan teaching her skills her father had deemed unsuitable for a woman. They worked well together, anticipated each other's needs, enjoyed each other's company. "I have no money to pay you rent," she pointed out, practical despite the hope blooming in her chest. "Your cooking's payment enough," Ethan said with a small smile. "Best I've eaten in years. Besides, having someone else to help with chores means I can focus on expanding the west pasture before winter." It was a practical arrangement, offered without pressure or expectation. Grace considered it carefully, weighing her limited options. San Antonio was an unknown quantity. Her cousin might welcome her, or might turn her away, fearful of her father's influence. Here, at least, she had found a measure of safety and purpose. "All right," she agreed finally. "I'll stay. For now." Relief flickered across Ethan's face, quickly masked by nonchalance. "Good. That's settled then." He returned his attention to the checkerboard. "Your move, I believe." The weeks that followed established a new normal at Redemption Ranch. Grace's riding improved daily, and soon she was accompanying Ethan on his rounds of the property, learning the boundaries and features of the land. Scout divided her time between them, sometimes working cattle with Ethan, sometimes gardening with Grace, always alert and protective of them both. Grace transformed the neglected kitchen garden into a thriving plot, coaxing vegetables from the sun-baked Texas soil with determination and care. She cleaned and organized the house, making small improvements that Ethan pretended not to notice but clearly appreciated. She mended fences, literal and figurative, creating a place for herself in this new world. October brought cooler temperatures and the annual cattle drive to market. Ethan had been preparing for weeks, and the day of departure brought a flurry of activity. "I'll be gone 3 days, 4 at most," he explained as he packed saddlebags with supplies. "Jose and his sons will help with the drive. They're good men, worked with my father before me." Grace nodded, fighting an unexpected sense of loss at the thought of his absence. "We'll manage here, won't we, Scout?" The dog thumped her tail in agreement, though her eyes tracked Ethan's movements with evident concern. "There's plenty of food, and the rifle's loaded in case of trouble," Ethan continued. "Not that I expect any, but better safe than sorry." "I can shoot," Grace said, surprising them both. At Ethan's raised eyebrow, she explained, "My brother taught me, before he left for the war. It was our secret." Father would have been furious. Something like admiration flashed in Ethan's eyes. "You're full of surprises, Grace Mitchell." She smiled, pleased by his reaction. "Go on, then. Scout and I will keep everything running smoothly until you return." Ethan hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small key. "Almost forgot. This unlocks the bottom drawer of my desk. There's some emergency money there if you need it." The gesture of trust wasn't lost on Grace. "We'll be fine. Be safe on the trail." With a final nod, Ethan mounted Maverick and rode to meet Jose and the cattle herd at the north pasture. Grace watched until he disappeared from view, an unfamiliar ache in her chest. The first day of Ethan's absence passed uneventfully. Grace completed her usual chores, then tackled projects she'd been planning, reorganizing the pantry, mending Ethan's work shirts, preparing meals that could be easily reheated upon his return. Scout stayed close, seemingly as aware of Ethan's absence as Grace. On the second day, Grace rode Cinnamon to check the south fence line as Ethan had asked. The freedom of riding alone across the open range filled her with confidence she'd never imagined possible. This was who she could be away from her father's control, capable, independent, strong. The third day dawned with unexpected cloud cover, a rarity in the typically clear autumn sky. By midday, Grace could taste the promise of rain in the air, a blessing in the drought-prone region but a concern for travelers on the trail. "He'll be fine," she assured Scout as they watched the gathering storm from the porch. "Ethan knows these lands better than anyone." As evening approached with no sign of Ethan's return, Grace lit the lamps and placed one in the window as a beacon. The promised storm arrived with startling intensity, rain lashing against the windows and wind howling around the eaves. Scout grew increasingly restless, pacing between the door and window, whining softly. "I'm worried too," Grace admitted, stroking the dog's damp fur. "But he'll come home when he can." Home. The words slipped out unbidden, carrying weight and meaning she hadn't intended. When had Redemption Ranch become home? When had Ethan's return become something she anticipated with such emotion? Sleep proved elusive that night, with Grace rising frequently to check the window for any sign of approaching riders. The storm raged until dawn, finally breaking with the rising sun. Grace stepped onto the porch, surveying the aftermath. Branches down, the chicken coop roof partially damaged, puddles everywhere. She was repairing the coop when Scout suddenly lifted her head, ears alert. A moment later, the dog bolted toward the main road, barking excitedly. Grace shaded her eyes against the morning sun, heart leaping at the sight of riders approaching. Ethan rode at the front, his tall figure unmistakable even at a distance. Scout reached him first, circling Maverick with joyful barks until Ethan leaned down to ruffle her fur reassuringly. Grace stepped forward, then stopped, suddenly conscious of her appearance, hair escaping its braid, clothes mud-spattered from morning chores. She brushed ineffectually at the worst of it, a lifetime of her father's criticism about proper feminine presentation rising unbidden. But when Ethan's gaze found her, his weary face broke into a smile that dispelled her concerns. He looked exhausted but triumphant as he dismounted, handing Maverick's reins to Jose before approaching her. "Cattle brought good prices," he announced. "Best year yet." "I'm glad," Grace replied, meaning it. His success was the ranch's security, and the ranch had become her sanctuary. Was the storm bad on the trail? Bad enough, Ethan confirmed. But we found shelter in time. Sorry to be late returning. I wasn't worried, Grace lied, the sleepless night evidence to the contrary. Ethan's knowing smile suggested he saw through her pretense, but he didn't challenge it. Instead, he sniffed appreciatively. Is that coffee I smell? And biscuits, Grace confirmed. I thought you might be hungry when you returned. Starving, Ethan admitted. Trail rations get old fast. As they walked toward the house, Scout trotting happily beside them, Ethan's hand briefly touched the small of Grace's back. A casual gesture, likely unconscious, but it sent warmth spreading through her nonetheless. Over breakfast, Ethan recounted the cattle drive, the negotiations in town, the unexpected challenges and triumphs. Grace listened, asking questions and sharing her own tales of managing the ranch in his absence. Their conversation flowed easily, comfortable and familiar, in a way that still surprised her. Town's buzzing with news, Ethan mentioned as he accepted a third cup of coffee. Some preacher's been through, asking questions, offering rewards for information about his missing daughter. Grace's hands stilled. The comfortable warmth of the kitchen suddenly chilled. My father, she whispered. He's come himself. Ethan nodded grimly. Figured as much. He stirred up quite a fuss, giving sermons about the prodigal daughter and God's judgment. Got half the town worked into a righteous fervor, searching for you like it's their Christian duty. Fear clutched at Grace's throat. Did anyone mention me? This ranch? No, Ethan assured her. Few people connect me to town anyway. I do most of my trading through Jose, and nobody out this way would talk to a stranger, preacher or not, without good reason. Grace released a shaky breath. He won't give up. You don't know him like I do. Maybe not, Ethan conceded. But I know this land, and I know how to protect what's mine. The possessive word hung between them, ambiguous yet significant. Was he referring to the ranch, or something more? I should leave, Grace said reluctantly. I'm putting you in danger by staying. Running didn't solve your problems before, Ethan pointed out. What makes you think it will now? What choice do I have? Grace demanded, frustration edging her voice. My father has money, influence, and God's righteousness on his side, at least in the eyes of his followers. I have nothing. You have me, Ethan said simply. The declaration silenced her protests. Ethan looked almost surprised by his own words, but he didn't retract them. What does that mean? Grace asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan pushed back from the table, moving to stare out the window, his back to her. It means I don't want you to leave, not because of fear, anyway. Grace remained seated, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he must hear it. Why? He turned to face her, his expression more vulnerable than she'd ever seen it. Because these past weeks with you here have been the best I've had in years. Because the ranch feels alive again with you in it. Because Scout would never forgive me if I let you go. The last addition, clearly meant to lighten the moment, drew a small smile from Grace despite her anxiety. And because, Ethan continued more seriously, I think you feel it too. This connection between us. Grace couldn't deny it. Something had been building between them, in shared meals and riding lessons, in quiet evenings playing checkers and early mornings greeting the sun together. Something neither had expected nor sought, but which had taken root nonetheless. I do, she admitted, but my father is one man, Ethan interrupted. A powerful one, yes, but still, just a man. And men can be stood against when necessary. His confidence bolstered her courage. What are you suggesting? Stay, Ethan said simply. Not as my housekeeper or ranch hand, but as yourself, Grace Mitchell, who makes her own choices and lives by her own faith, not someone else's. And if he finds me here? She pressed. Then we face him together, Ethan replied. I won't let him take you anywhere against your will. That's a promise. Grace studied him, this man who had taken in a bedraggled runaway bride without question, who had taught her to ride and trusted her with his home, who was now offering to stand between her and the storm that was Jeremiah Mitchell. "I can't ask that of you," she said softly. "You didn't ask," Ethan pointed out. "I'm offering." Scout, sensing the tension between them, moved to rest her head on Grace's lap, brown eyes gazing up with seeming understanding. The dog's presence grounded her, a reminder of the unconditional acceptance she'd found at Redemption Ranch. "Let me think about it," Grace said finally. "This isn't a decision to make in haste." Ethan nodded, respecting her need for reflection. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." The certainty in his voice was a balm to her uncertainty. Whatever she decided, Ethan would accept it. The choice was truly hers, perhaps the first completely free choice of her adult life. That night, after Ethan had retired to his room, Grace sat on the porch swing, Scout beside her, contemplating her options. The stars stretched endlessly above, a testament to possibilities she'd never dared consider under her father's roof. Staying meant risk, to herself, to Ethan, to this fragile happiness they'd begun to build. Leaving meant safety, perhaps, but also surrender to the fear that had driven her from the church steps in her wedding dress. Scout sighed contentedly in her sleep, trusting completely in Grace's presence beside her. That trust, freely given and cherished, helped clarify what Grace had known in her heart since the moment Ethan had offered her refuge from the storm. Some things were worth fighting for. Some people, too. When Ethan found her the next morning preparing breakfast as usual, she met his questioning gaze with newfound resolve. "I've been thinking," she began, setting a plate before him. "About?" he prompted when she hesitated. "About staying. About what that would mean." Grace squared her shoulders. "I want to stay, Ethan, not out of fear or necessity, but because I choose to. Because this place, this life we've started building, it matters to me." The smile that transformed Ethan's face was worth every moment of uncertainty. "Then stay," he said simply. "We'll figure out the rest together." Outside, the sun broke through morning clouds, bathing Redemption Ranch in golden light. A new day, full of promise and possibility, stretching before them. November arrived with a startling chill, painting the landscape in russet and gold. Grace and Ethan settled into a partnership that transcended their initial arrangement, working side by side to prepare Redemption Ranch for winter. Grace had transformed the long-neglected ranch house into a true home, filling it with small touches that spoke of permanence rather than temporary shelter. Dried herbs hung from kitchen rafters, handmade quilts draped across chairs, and the scent of fresh-baked bread became a comforting constant. "Never thought I'd see this place looking so alive again," Jose remarked one evening when he stopped by with his wife Maria to deliver eggs. His weathered face crinkled in a knowing smile as he glanced between Grace and Ethan. "The ranch suits you, Miss Grace." "Thank you," she replied, color rising in her cheeks. "It suits me better than I ever expected." After the older couple departed, Ethan found Grace on the porch, watching the sunset paint the horizon in brilliant orange and purple streaks. Scout lay at her feet, ever vigilant despite the peace of the moment. "Jose's right," Ethan said, settling beside her on the swing. "You belong here." Grace's smile held a hint of wonder. "6 months ago, I couldn't have imagined this life. Any of it." Ethan's hand found hers, fingers intertwining with casual intimacy. Such gestures had become common between them, a physical manifestation of the bond that continued to deepen with each passing day. "Any regrets?" he asked, his tone light but his eyes serious. Grace considered the question, her thumb tracing circles on the back of his hand. "None about leaving," she said finally. "But sometimes I wonder about my mother. She's lived under my father's thumb for 30 years. I wish I could have convinced her to come with me." Ethan nodded, understanding her conflict. "Some people aren't ready to leave, even when staying hurts them." "Like your wife?" Grace ventured carefully. They rarely discussed Eleanor, though Grace had pieced together enough from occasional comments to understand that the divorce had left deep wounds. Ethan's jaw tightened briefly, then relaxed. "Eleanor never wanted this life. I knew that, but I convinced myself she'd learn to love it like I do. My stubbornness cost us both years of happiness." "Do you still love her?" Grace asked, the question escaping before she could reconsider. "No," Ethan replied without hesitation. "I haven't for a long time. I loved the idea of her, the future I'd imagined for us. It took losing her to realize she wasn't who I thought she was, and I wasn't who she needed. The honesty between them felt like a gift, hard-won through shared vulnerability. Grace leaned her head against his shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "I've been thinking," Ethan said after a comfortable silence. "The church social's next weekend in town. Would you want to go?" Grace stiffened slightly. "Is that wise? My father may still have people looking for me." "It's been nearly 3 months," Ethan reasoned, "and we've heard nothing more about preachers asking questions. Besides, you can't stay hidden on this ranch forever." The truth of his words resonated with Grace. She had chosen to stay, to build a life here, but fear still kept her isolated from the wider community. Was that truly the freedom she'd run toward, or just another kind of cage? "You're right," she decided. "I'd like to go." Ethan's smile was worth the momentary anxiety. Good. It's time people met the woman who's brought Redemption Ranch back to life. The week leading up to the social passed in a flurry of preparation. Grace fretted over her limited wardrobe, eventually accepting Maria's offer to alter one of her daughter's dresses. A simple blue cotton that complemented Grace's dark hair and brought out the azure of her eyes. "You look beautiful," Ethan said when she emerged from her room on Saturday evening, the dress fitting her slender frame perfectly. Grace smoothed the skirt nervously. "It's been so long since I've been among people. What if they ask questions I can't answer?" "Then don't answer them," Ethan replied simply. "You don't owe anyone your story, Grace." His reassurance steadied her as they rode toward town in Ethan's wagon, Scout trotting alongside. The church social was held in the community hall beside the white steepled building where local congregations gathered for worship. As they approached, sounds of fiddle music and laughter drifted through the crisp evening air. Grace hesitated at the entrance, a lifetime of her father's strict religious observances making even this innocent gathering seem somehow forbidden. Ethan's hand at the small of her back provided gentle encouragement. "Just a few neighbors gathering for food and music," he reminded her. "Nothing to fear." Inside, lanterns cast a warm glow over trestle tables laden with food while couples twirled to a lively reel at the far end of the hall. Children darted between adults, playing elaborate games of their own devising. The scene was so different from the somber religious gatherings of Grace's childhood that she momentarily wondered if it could truly be called a church social at all. "Ethan Cole, as I live and breathe," called a robust woman with silver-streaked hair. "Didn't expect to see you here. You haven't attended a social in years." "Evening, Mrs. Thornton," Ethan greeted her respectfully. "Thought it was time to be sociable again." He drew Grace forward gently. "This is Grace Mitchell. She's been helping me at the ranch." Mrs. Thornton's shrewd eyes assessed Grace with undisguised curiosity. "Mitchell, you say? Any relation to that fire and brimstone preacher who came through a while back?" Grace froze, but Ethan answered smoothly. "Different Mitchells entirely. Grace is from over San Antonio way." The older woman seemed to accept this explanation, turning her attention to more pressing matters. "Well, don't just stand there." The buffet table's groaning with food. "And Grace, you must meet everyone. We so rarely get new faces in these parts." What followed was a whirlwind of introductions. Grace met the doctor and his wife, the blacksmith, the general store proprietor, the school teacher, and countless farmers and ranchers whose names blurred together. To her relief, most seemed satisfied with the simple explanation that she was helping at Redemption Ranch, asking more about her cooking or gardening skills than her background. "You doing all right?" Ethan checked during a quiet moment between introductions. "Not too overwhelming?" Grace surprised herself with her answer. "I'm enjoying it, actually. Everyone's been kind." "Told you," Ethan said with a wink. "Nothing to fear." As the evening progressed, the fiddlers struck up a waltz. Couples moved to the cleared space that served as a dance floor, arms around each other as they swayed to the gentle rhythm. "May I have this dance?" Ethan asked formally, extending his hand. Grace hesitated. "I've never danced before. My father considered it sinful." "Nothing sinful about it," Ethan assured her. "Just follow my lead." Tentatively, she placed her hand in his, allowing him to guide her to the dance floor. His arms circled her waist, firm and supportive, while his other hand held hers with surprising gentleness. At first, Grace focused on her feet, terrified of stepping on his boots, but gradually the music seeped into her bones, and she found herself moving naturally with him. "See? You're a natural," Ethan murmured, echoing his words from her first riding lesson. Grace laughed softly. "You seem to think I'm a natural at everything." "Not everything," he teased. "Your first attempt at biscuits nearly broke my tooth." "That was the flour's fault," she protested, enjoying their easy banter. Too much cornmeal in the mix. As they twirled among the other dancers, Grace caught admiring glances from townspeople. Some looked merely curious, others openly approving of the pair they made. For the first time since leaving her father's house, Grace felt not just safe but seen, recognized as her own person, not merely Jeremiah Mitchell's obedient daughter. Later, as they shared a slice of apple pie at one of the small tables, the schoolteacher, Miss Winters, approached them. "I couldn't help noticing how well you read the hymnal during the blessing," she commented to Grace. "We're desperately short of help at the school. Our reading program for the younger children needs another adult. Would you perhaps consider volunteering one afternoon a week?" Grace blinked in surprise at the unexpected request. "I don't have any teaching experience." "But you clearly love books," Miss Winters persisted. "That's all the younger ones need. Someone patient who can help them sound out words and share the joy of reading." Grace glanced at Ethan, who nodded encouragingly. "The ranch can spare you for an afternoon," he assured her. The prospect of contributing to the community, of having a purpose beyond the ranch, appealed deeply to Grace. "I'd be honored," she told Miss Winters. "When should I start?" By the time they left the social, well past midnight, Grace felt a new sense of belonging. These people had welcomed her without reservation, offering friendship and purpose, with no questions asked. The contrast with her father's judgmental congregation couldn't have been starker. "Thank you for convincing me to come," she told Ethan as they rode home beneath a canopy of stars, Scout trotting contentedly behind the wagon. "You were right. I needed this." Ethan's smile was visible even in the moonlight. "You've been hiding too long." It's time the world got to know Grace Mitchell. The weeks that followed brought new rhythms to Grace's life. Tuesdays were now spent at the schoolhouse, helping eager young minds discover the magic of words. She found unexpected joy in their progress, in watching confidence bloom as they mastered challenging texts. Miss Winters proved to be not just a colleague, but a friend, sharing teaching techniques and stories of her own journey to independence. As an unmarried woman, in a world that valued women primarily as wives and mothers. At the ranch, Grace and Ethan fell into increasingly domestic patterns. Their evening meals stretched longer as they lingered over conversation. Sometimes Ethan read aloud from one of his precious books, while Grace mended clothing or worked on a quilt she was crafting from scraps. Scout invariably lay between them, head resting on whoever had been most generous with table scraps that day. They rarely spoke directly of the future, or put names to the feelings growing between them, yet each day strengthened the unspoken bond. Ethan began including Grace in decisions about the ranch, which fields to plant come spring, whether to expand the cattle herd, how to reinvest the profits from the fall drive. Grace offered opinions freely, her practical mind and quick intelligence earning Ethan's respect and admiration. December arrived with unusual force, bringing a rare Texas snowfall that transformed Redemption Ranch into a wonderland of white. Grace stood on the porch at dawn, marveling at the pristine landscape. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Ethan said, joining her with coffee mugs in hand. "Doesn't happen often around here." "It's magical," Grace breathed, accepting the steaming cup gratefully, like God painted everything clean overnight. Ethan studied her profile, noting the peace that had gradually replaced the fear in her expression. "Your faith is different now," he observed, "since you left your father's house." Grace considered this, watching her breath form clouds in the frigid air. "I've had to find my own way to God," she admitted, "without my father's interpretation standing between us. I've discovered he's not the vengeful deity my father preached, but something gentler, more forgiving." "And you're all right with that? This new understanding?" "More than all right," Grace replied. "For the first time, I feel truly connected to something greater than myself, without fear driving my devotion." Ethan nodded, seeming to understand what she couldn't fully articulate. "Faith should lift you up, not beat you down." "Exactly," Grace agreed, grateful for his insight. They stood in companionable silence, watching the sun transform the snow into a million sparkling diamonds. Scout bounded into the pristine expanse, leaving chaotic paw prints in her wake, her joy in the novel experience evident in every leap. "Christmas is coming," Ethan mentioned. "Any traditions you'd like to observe?" Quote, the question caught Grace by surprise. In her father's house, Christmas had been a somber religious observance, stripped of secular celebrations that Jeremiah Mitchell deemed pagan and ungodly. "I don't know," she admitted. "We never had a tree or exchanged gifts. It was all scripture readings and reminders of our sinful nature." Sadness flickered across Ethan's face. "Then we'll make new traditions," he decided, starting with cutting the perfect pine from the North Ridge. The following days were filled with preparations Grace had never experienced. Together they trekked to the ridge and selected a fragrant pine, Ethan teaching her to wield an axe with precision. They dragged it home on a sled, Scout racing circles around them, seemingly as excited as Grace about the novel activity. In the evenings, they crafted ornaments from whatever materials were available. Pine cones dipped in flour paste and dusted with sugar to resemble snow, paper stars cut from old newspapers, strings of dried berries and popcorn. Grace discovered an unexpected talent for creating delicate angels from corn husks, their flowing robes and wings, giving them an ethereal quality that delighted Ethan. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked, watching her nimble fingers fashion another miniature figure. "I used to make dolls for the younger girls in our congregation," Grace explained. "My father didn't approve of store-bought toys, but he allowed these since I made them from natural materials." Ethan shook his head, a now familiar gesture whenever he learned another detail of her restricted upbringing. "Your father missed so much by focusing only on what he feared rather than what he might have celebrated." The observation struck Grace as profoundly true. Her father's faith had been built around prohibitions. Don't dance, don't read secular books, don't laugh too loudly, don't question. In contrast, her new understanding embraced possibilities. The beauty in a snowfall, the joy in creating something with her hands, the peace found in true companionship. Christmas Eve arrived with another light dusting of snow, as if nature itself were celebrating the season. Grace spent the day baking cookies and bread and a special cake with dried fruits that Maria had taught her to make. The house filled with mouth-watering aromas, a sensory reminder of how far she'd come from the austere kitchen of her childhood home. As evening approached, Ethan disappeared mysteriously for over an hour, returning with ruddy cheeks and a secretive smile that he refused to explain. They shared a simple but delicious dinner, then moved to the parlor where their decorated tree stood proudly in the corner, handmade ornaments catching the firelight. "I have something for you," Ethan said, reaching behind the sofa to produce a carefully wrapped package. "It's customary to open one gift on Christmas Eve." Grace accepted the package with trembling hands. "But I haven't. I didn't realize." "You've given me more than you know," Ethan interrupted gently. "Open it." She unwrapped the paper carefully to reveal a beautifully tooled leather saddlebag, her initials GM, burned into the flap in elegant script. "It's beautiful," she whispered, running her fingers over the detailed work. "Made it myself," Ethan admitted. "Figured if you're going to keep riding Cinnamon, you should have your own gear." The thoughtfulness of the gift moved Grace deeply. It wasn't just a beautiful object, but a statement of permanence, an acknowledgement that her place at Redemption Ranch was established and valued. "Thank you," she said, emotion making her voice husky. "I love it." Ethan's smile was tender. "There's more to Christmas than scripture readings and guilt, Grace. It's about giving from the heart, celebrating new beginnings, recognizing the light in the darkest time of year." "I'm beginning to understand that," she replied softly. They sat together before the fire long into the night, sharing stories and dreams, the comfortable silences between them as meaningful as their words. Scout dozed at their feet, occasionally twitching in canine dreams. When Grace finally rose to retire, Ethan caught her hand. "I have one more surprise, but it will have to wait until morning." His boyish excitement made her laugh. "I'll try to contain my curiosity." Sleep came easily that night, peace settling over Grace like the gentle snow outside. Her dreams were pleasant, unmarred by the nightmares of pursuit that had plagued her early weeks at the ranch. Christmas morning dawned clear and bright. Grace dressed quickly in her warmest clothes, eager despite herself to discover Ethan's surprise. She found him in the kitchen, coffee already brewed and biscuits warming in the oven. "Merry Christmas," he greeted her, eyes crinkling with his smile. "Merry Christmas," she returned, the phrase feeling new and meaningful on her tongue. "Now, what's the surprise you've been so mysterious about?" "Patience," Ethan teased, handing her a steaming mug. "Breakfast first, then presents." They ate quickly, both infected with a childlike excitement that Grace had never experienced during the holidays. Finally, Ethan led her to the barn, Scout bounding ahead eagerly. "Close your eyes," he instructed when they reached the doors. Grace complied, heart racing with anticipation as Ethan guided her forward several steps. "Now look," he said, his voice warm with pleasure. Grace opened her eyes to find herself facing a beautiful chestnut mare. Not Cinnamon, but a younger horse with intelligent eyes and a white star on her forehead. "This is Starlight," Ethan introduced. "She's yours, if you want her." Grace stepped forward in wonder, reaching out to stroke the mare's velvety nose. Starlight nuzzled her palm gently, seeming to accept her immediately. "Mine," Grace whispered, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the gift. "Ethan, I can't possibly." "You can," he assured her. "She's young but well-trained. Perfect for someone who's learned as quickly as you have." Tears welled in Grace's eyes as she ran her hand along Starlight's sleek neck. "She's magnificent," she managed. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll ride with me," Ethan replied, suddenly serious. "Not just today, but for all the days to come." Grace turned to face him, recognizing the deeper question beneath his words. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" Ethan stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "I'm asking you to stay, Grace. Not as my helper or my friend, but as my wife, if you'll have me." The proposal, though not entirely unexpected given the direction of their relationship, still left Grace momentarily speechless. This was nothing like the arranged marriage her father had forced upon her. This was a choice, freely offered and awaiting her equally free response. "Your father wanted you to marry a preacher," Ethan continued when she remained silent. "I'm just a rancher with dirt under my fingernails and more cattle than cash. But I love you, Grace Mitchell. I think I have since you stood on my porch in that wedding dress, soaking wet and scared, but still defiant." Grace found her voice at last. "I don't want a preacher," she said firmly. "I want a man who sees me for who I am, who encourages me to become more than I thought possible, who stands beside me rather than above me." Her hands tightened around his. "I want you, Ethan Cole. Is that a yes?" he asked, hope brightening his eyes. "Yes," Grace confirmed, a laugh of pure joy escaping her. "1,000 times yes." Ethan gathered her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his enthusiasm. Scout barked excitedly, racing circles around them as if celebrating in her own way. When Ethan finally set Grace down, his expression grew serious again. "Your father may still come looking for you," he reminded her. "Are you prepared for that?" Grace considered the question carefully. "I am," she said with newfound conviction. "I'm not running anymore, Ethan. This is my home, my life, my choice. If my father comes, we'll face him together." Pride and love mingled in Ethan's gaze. "Together," he agreed, sealing the "race you to the ridge" she challenged, mounting Starlight with practiced ease. Ethan laughed, swinging onto Maverick's back. "You're on." They galloped across the winter landscape, Scout racing alongside, their joyous shouts echoing across Redemption Ranch, a place that had lived up to its name in ways neither could have predicted. For Grace had indeed found redemption here, not from sin as her father had preached, but from fear. And Ethan had found it too, redemption from loneliness and the bitter aftermath of failure. Together, they had created something new and precious. A home built on choice rather than obligation, on love freely given rather than demanded. As they crested the ridge, the Texas landscape spread before them like a promise, wild and challenging, beautiful and worth every hardship. "Look," Grace called, pointing to where the morning sun illuminated the distant mountains. It's going to be a perfect day. Ethan reached across the space between them, his hand finding hers with the ease of perfect understanding. The first of many, he promised. And in that moment, with the wind in her hair and love in her heart, Grace knew with absolute certainty that she had found where she truly belonged. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.